everyone. Thank you for being here today virtually. I really wish I was there in person. I always really enjoy being at Sabre West. My name is Liz Barnes, and I'm an assistant professor of biology education at Middle Tennessee State University. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the religious backgrounds and evolution perceptions of Black and Hispanic students. So research shows that you're more likely to remember what's said at the beginning of my talk. So I want to start my research today with my main points. The study I'm about to show you will indicate that Black students in college biology classes have more unfavorable attitudes towards evolution than students from any other racial or ethnic identity. And that these unfavorable attitudes towards evolution are statistically explained by stronger religious commitment among Black students. We do not see this pattern for Hispanic students. This is important to consider because although Black students are underrepresented in every discipline of biology, they're almost completely absent from fields of biology that emphasize evolution the most, including evolutionary biology and ecology. So if we want to make evolution and biology education more inclusive for Black students, then we may have to think about how we're addressing the relationship between religion and evolution in the classroom and use religious cultural competence in evolution education to highlight where evolution and religion can be compatible. However, I didn't do this work alone, so I want to start with acknowledging my collaborators, Drs. Brownell, Sinatra, and Safria, who gave a talk earlier in the session, as well as my undergraduate researchers, Tasia and Haley, who helped with this project. Further, identities of researchers can influence the interpretation of the results. So I think it's really important for me to recognize the diversity of identities involved in this project. So this project focuses on racial, ethnic, and religious identity among biology students, and the researchers on this study identified as Black, South Asian, and white, as well as atheist, agnostic, and Christian. Okay, so that brings me to this graph, which shows data from the US Census and the National Center for Education Statistics. So the Black dotted lines are the percent of the United States population that is Black, Asian, and Hispanic. Now the bars are the percent of PhDs awarded to these groups within different fields of biology, including biomedical sciences, nursing, ecology, and evolutionary biology. So if the dotted line is above a bar for a particular group, that means that group is underrepresented in that discipline. And what we've known for some time now is that underrepresented students are underrepresented in most fields of biology, right? It's not specific to one field. However, more recently, researchers are noticing that Black students are severely underrepresented, specifically in ecology and evolutionary biology, with only 1% of PhDs going to Black individuals in those fields between the years of 2015 and 2017. So why? Why is it that we have such an absence of students from one race in one particular field of biology? So I'm going to ask you all to get a little bit active now in this and share your ideas in the chat. What factors do you think contribute to underrepresentation of Black students in evolutionary biology and ecology specifically? Lack of role models, somebody said. Religious barriers. They don't care about the subject. They can't relate to it as much. Value alignment. They do not see the application to human health or their community. That's, there are microaggressions, outdoor experiences early in life. Less aware. Okay, great ideas. Thank you for those. All right, so there has actually been some research on this done over the last few years, and that has investigated and uncovered some hypotheses for this, right? And as one person said, a lack of same-race role models have been found to be important for Black students' interest in evolutionary biology in multiple studies, actually. And researchers found that Black students had higher discomfort with outdoor environments and less exposure to ecology and evolutionary biology, which led to a lower sense of belonging and interest in ecology and evolution. Further, evolutionary theory has been and is still used in unscientific ways to promote racist ideology and behaviors, and this may also dissuade them from pursuing this field. But these studies have also noted that Black students report being much more religious than students from other groups. And religiosity is an extremely impactful factor for whether someone's going to accept evolution. So consider this graph, which breaks down the relationship between accepting and understanding evolution by religiosity levels. So the x-axis is the number of answers that somebody gets correct on an evolution knowledge test. Well, the y-axis is the probability that someone will think evolution is true. So as we would expect when teaching most topics in biology, as people understand the topic better, they're more likely to accept it. However, there are gaps between students with different religious identities. So the non-religious students are almost 100% likely to accept evolution if they fully understand evolution. However, for religious individuals, even if they get all the answers correct on an evolution test, they still only have about a 50% chance of thinking evolution is true. So religiosity can be a strong barrier to evolution acceptance. But what does the religious commitment and background of students from different racial or ethnic identities look like? Well, research has consistently found that Black and Hispanic folks in the United States are more religious than white people. And although past researchers have suggested this strong religiosity among Black and Hispanic students may be a factor influencing differences between student evolution acceptance across races, nobody had tested this hypothesis until now. But there's also another factor to take into account. It's not just the strength of religious identity that matters. There are denominational differences between people from different groups as well. So the majority of Black individuals in the United States are Protestant Christians and very few are Catholic. While almost half of Hispanic individuals are Catholic and only a minority are Protestant. And this is important to consider because the Catholic Church has long supported the idea of evolution, while the Protestant Church, conversely, has not shown such consistent support for evolution. So religion might not be as important of a factor influencing Hispanic individuals' evolution acceptance as a group compared to Black individuals. Okay, so that brings me to the current study. We wanted to see if we emailed instructors across the nation and asked them if they would forward a survey to their students that included measures of acceptance of evolution, religiosity, and religious denomination, and a question asking students to indicate their racial or ethnic identity. We also collected measures for potentially confounding factors such as gender, age, and socioeconomic status. And we ended up getting data from almost 10,000 students in 77 classes across 17 US states. And this large sample size is really what helped us disaggregate students of color in our analyses that you may not have been able to do in previous analyses. All right, so in terms of religiosity, how closely did the population of college biology students mirror that of the general US population? Well, our students looked very similar to what we see in the public. So these are violin plots of students' religiosity levels broken down by racial ethnic identification. The shapes of the violin represent the density of the data at that specific point on the y-axis. So for instance, among white students, you see that there's a large number of students who are of average religiosity here at the 0 on the y-axis. Now, the black solid line represents the median of the data. So for instance, the median of Black student religiosity is higher than students from any other racial or ethnic group. And you also see, based on the violin plot, that there's a large aggregation of students at the highest point of the religiosity scale compared to students from other racial ethnic groups. Conversely, there are very few Black students who fall at the low end of the religiosity scale, indicating that very few Black students are not religious. Now, each letter indicates whether there's a statistically significant difference between groups of students. So if a group shares a letter, they're not statistically different from one another. So for instance, Black students do not share a B with any other group because they were found to be statistically significantly more religious than any other group, while Asian and white students share a letter A because they had similar levels of religiosity. All right, but what about acceptance of evolution? What does that look? We measured 3 aspects of evolution acceptance because students tend to have different levels of acceptance of evolution depending on if it's microevolution, macroevolution, or human evolution. But we found that Black students were less accepting than students from any other racial or ethnic group in all cases. We see the exact opposite pattern of religiosity in that Black students scored lower than any other racial group on these measures. But there was a particularly prominent gap between groups on their acceptance of human evolution scores. So when looking at the Black student population, there are almost no Black students that are highly accepting of human evolution. Further, the median and the most dense portion of the distribution of data points lie at a point lower than the overall average of the population and lower than that of students from any other race or ethnicity. But what about our research question? So our research question was, can the higher rates of religiosity among Black students actually explain their lower rates of evolution acceptance? And we used mediation analyses to explore this question. Mediation analysis helps us to determine if the relationship between 2 variables can be explained by a third confounding variable. So in this case, the relationship between race and evolution acceptance might be the result of a third variable, religiosity. Okay, so here is this really big, scary table that gives a lot of information for those of you who are more familiar and would like to see the details. However, for those of you who are not so familiar, I want to bring your attention to a few important numbers. So first is the coefficient for the mediation effect. which is the average change in evolution acceptance that would occur if the measures of religiosity observed among Black or Hispanic students were the same as white students. For Black students, we see there would be a significant change in evolution acceptance coefficients. But with Hispanic students, we did not see the same trend. The next number is the proportion mediated. This is the amount of the gap between white and Black students that is accounted for by religiosity differences between the groups. We don't show these numbers for Hispanic students because their mediation effect was so low. But for Black students, 32% of the gap in microevolution acceptance scores could be explained by the higher religiosity levels of those students. And for acceptance of macro and human evolution, this was even more pronounced. Almost half the gap between Black and white student evolution acceptance scores could be explained by religiosity differences between the two groups. All right, so given these data, now I am going to argue that we need to reduce the perceived conflict between religion and science to create more inclusive biology education. So students perceive a disproportionate amount of conflict between religion and evolution than actually exists. So for instance, one of our recent studies found that 57% of students in introductory biology think that people have to be atheists to accept evolution. And this perception was associated with lower evolution acceptance among highly religious students. Further, the biology community has not been welcoming of religious individuals, particularly Christians. Our experimental social psychology study showed that biologists can be biased against highly religious Christians, and they rate highly religious Ph.D. applicants as less likable, less competent, and less hireable than non-religious applicants. And students perceive this bias. Over half of students in one study said that they perceived discrimination against Christians to be a problem in science. And in another recent study, Christian graduate students reported that their Christianity is a stigmatized identity that they sometimes conceal in the context of their biology programs. So if we want to improve the diversity of evolutionary biology and ecology, we're going to have to change these patterns in biology and reduce perceived conflict between religion, biology, and evolution. So how can we do this? Well, in the past, our team has advocated for biology instructors who are mostly secular and white to use religious cultural competence in evolution education and highlight compatibility between religion and evolution. Cultural competence is the ability of one culture to effectively communicate to another culture. And biology instructors can use religious cultural competence in evolution education to highlight compatibility between religion and evolution to more effectively communicate about evolution. So first, we can highlight relevant role models for students. So same-race role models in a discipline have been shown to be even more important for Black students' sense of belonging than students from other underrepresented groups. Joseph Graves is a great scientist to highlight for students. He was the first African-American to earn his Ph.D. in evolutionary biology, and he advocates tirelessly for the inclusion and support of Black students in evolutionary science. Instructors can also teach the bounded nature of science and explain that science does not answer questions about morality or about the existence of God. And in fact, they can teach that science is technically agnostic rather than atheistic. So Thomas Henry Huxley, who was an important figure in evolutionary history, also coined the term agnostic specifically to describe scientific belief. So he said that agnosticism is the essence of science and that it means we can't say we know or believe things that we have no scientific grounds for claiming, and that this notion not only puts aside popular theology and science, but also popular anti-theology. And this makes both the personal belief in atheism as well as a belief in God compatible with the agnostic science, which does not claim either view. All right, but this research still leaves a lot of unanswered questions. Religiosity only explained up to half of the gap in evolution acceptance between Black and white students. So there are other factors that should still be considered and studied in future research. So for instance, as I mentioned in the introduction, there is a distinct pattern in the history of evolutionary theory being used to justify the oppression of racial and ethnic minorities that may also cause distrust in evolution. Also, Black students are individuals. They're not just a collective like we measured in the survey. We need to understand the variation in their lived experiences, which cannot be captured through the quantitatively analyzed surveys that we used in this study. We need interview studies to more deeply understand the experiences of Black biology students who are learning evolution. All right, so coming back to my main points of the talk, I would like everyone to take from this, Black students in college biology classes have more unfavorable attitudes towards evolution than students from other racial ethnic identities. And these attitudes are explained by stronger religious commitment among Black students, but not among Hispanic students. This is important because Black students are almost completely absent from the fields of biology that emphasize evolution the most, including ecology and evolutionary biology. So if we want to make evolution and biology education more inclusive for Black students, then we have to think about how we're addressing the perceived conflict between religion and evolution in the classroom, and perhaps use religious cultural competence in evolution education. If you want to read more about this work, it was recently published in the December issue of CBE Life Sciences Education, and it's freely available to read. I've included a QR code on this slide and the final slide, so you can use your phone to access the article now to save for later if you'd like. And with that, I will take any questions. Thank you so much.